The night air was thick with fog as Daniel drove along the winding road. He had been traveling for hours, chasing a rumor he'd stumbled upon in an old newspaper archive, a village that didn't exist on modern maps. Locals who remembered it spoke only in hushed tones, as if saying its name aloud could summon something dreadful. Daniel, a journalist by trade and a skeptic by nature, was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. His car headlights cut through the mist, illuminating the outlines of twisted trees that seemed to lean toward the road, their skeletal branches reaching like fingers. Every mile he drove deepened the sense of isolation. The GPS signal had long vanished, leaving him entirely at the mercy of the narrow asphalt path. After what felt like an eternity, he saw it, a cluster of buildings, dark and decayed, rising from the fog like the skeleton of a forgotten time. A wooden sign, weathered beyond recognition, creaked in the wind. Daniel squinted to read it. The letters were barely legible, "Welcome to Ravencroft." He stepped out of his car. The fog was heavier now, curling around his ankles. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic, blood perhaps. He clicked his camera, the flash revealing the cracked facades of houses, the paint peeling like dead skin. As he walked further, the sound of the wind was joined by something else, a faint, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the town square, a hollow, wooden tapping, almost like footsteps but slower, deliberate. Daniel froze. "Hello?" His voice cracked, swallowed by the mist. No answer, just the tapping. Curiosity outweighed fear. He followed the sound to a dilapidated town hall. Its door hung on rusted hinges, swaying slightly. Inside, the smell of rot was overpowering. Papers littered the floor, yellowed and brittle. And then he saw it, a journal, lying open on the mayor's desk. The handwriting was frantic, the ink smeared as though the writer had been trembling. "They are watching, always watching. Do not trust the fog. Do not listen to the tapping. It calls for the living, and we are all already too late." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. The tapping had stopped. Silence descended like a heavy blanket, suffocating and absolute. He turned to leave, and froze. On the floor, imprints of small, bare feet led away from the desk and out into the hallway, disappearing into the shadows. A sudden creak behind him made him whirl around. No one was there. Only the empty hall, the broken windows, and the thick fog pressing against the door. His heart raced. Logic screamed that this was a prank, the product of imagination fueled by exhaustion, but deep down, he knew he was not alone. He decided to spend the night in the town hall. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow seemed to move when he blinked. Every gust of wind sounded like whispers. At exactly midnight, the tapping resumed, louder, more insistent, echoing through the empty building. Daniel grabbed his camera, determined to document whatever was here. The lens captured something the naked eye could not: fleeting silhouettes, faces twisted in silent screams, staring from the fog outside the broken windows. Then, from the corner of his vision, he saw it, a small figure, pale as moonlight, standing at the edge of the room. Its eyes were hollow, its mouth stretched in an impossible grin. It did not move but seemed to vibrate, like a shadow out of phase with reality. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs were rooted to the floor. The figure raised a hand, pointing directly at him. A voice, thin and broken, whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Before he could react, the room plunged into darkness. The tapping ceased. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the windows like cold fingers. And then, silence. A silence so complete it roared in his ears. Daniel fumbled for his flashlight. When he turned it on, the town hall was empty. The journal was gone. The footprints were gone. Only the oppressive fog remained. He realized then that Ravencroft was not a village one could leave by choice. And from somewhere deep within the fog, the tapping began again. Daniel didn't sleep. He hadn't slept in hours, but that night, trapped in Ravencroft, felt like a dream he couldn't wake from. Every creak of the building made him flinch. Every shadow seemed to breathe. The fog outside pressed against the cracked windows, as though the town itself were alive and breathing with him. When dawn arrived, or at least when a pale gray light filtered through the broken windows, Daniel realized the fog had not lifted. In the distance, he saw movement. Figures, human-shaped, but with movements too jerky, too unnatural to be alive, staggered through the mist. He grabbed his camera and zoomed in. His stomach churned. The figures' faces were featureless, blank masks that somehow felt familiar. One of them paused, raised a hand, and then vanished into the fog. Daniel's mind raced. Was this some elaborate prank, a movie set, or something far more sinister? He decided to explore the town, to see if anyone, or anything, was left alive. As he stepped outside, the ground beneath his feet was spongy, damp. Footprints, fresh but irregular, marked the mud. They led toward a narrow alley, darkened by the overhanging eaves of abandoned houses. Daniel followed, each step making his heart pound louder in his chest. Halfway down the alley, he stumbled over something. Looking down, he saw an old teddy bear, filthy and wet, with one glassy eye staring up at him. Beside it lay a small notebook. Daniel picked it up. The pages were filled with childish handwriting. "Don't go outside. They're hungry. They take you if they see you. Don't listen to the tapping." A shiver ran down his spine. Children, were the figures he'd seen, children. No, there was something wrong with them. Their movements, their faces, they were too twisted, too unnatural to be human. Suddenly, from behind him, a whisper. Daniel. He spun around. Nothing, just fog curling between the decayed buildings. The whisper came again, louder, more insistent. Daniel, come to us. The hairs on his neck stood on end. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet moved forward against his will, drawn toward the voice. He rounded a corner and came to what appeared to be a small square. A well stood in its center, its stones slick with moss. Around the well, shadowy figures waited. They were smaller than before, more childlike, yet their presence was oppressive, suffocating. The tapping resumed, echoing off the walls like a heartbeat. One figure stepped forward. Its face was a pale blur, eyes dark hollows. In its tiny hand, it held something, a fragment of paper. Daniel approached cautiously. The paper read, "You shouldn't have come." Before he could respond, the fog thickened, and the figures dissolved into it. Daniel felt hands on his shoulders, icy cold, gripping tightly. He spun around, but there was no one there. Only the fog curling and twisting around him like living smoke. He ran down the alleyways, past the abandoned houses, over mud and debris. The tapping followed, growing louder, insistent. The whispers multiplied, coming from every direction at once, calling his name, begging, warning, threatening. Daniel burst into the main street, gasping for breath. His car was gone. The road behind him stretched endlessly into fog, no trace of the path he had driven in on. Panic clawed at him. He tried the key in the ignition, nothing. The engine refused to turn. Then he heard laughter. Childish laughter, but warped and hollow, echoing from all around. The fog parted slightly, and he saw them, dozens of figures, moving silently, circling him. Their faces were featureless, but Daniel could feel their eyes drilling into him, judging him, searching. A voice shouted in his mind, not his ears, "You are not meant to leave. You belong here." Daniel's vision blurred. The mist seemed to curl into hands, reaching for him, pulling him toward the town square. He stumbled backward, trying to break free, but the ground beneath him shifted like quicksand. With every second, the town became more alive, more malevolent, the buildings leaning inward as though to trap him. Desperation gripped him. He remembered the journal in the town hall, the one warning about the tapping. He realized he had ignored it. Slowly, carefully, he reached into his backpack and pulled out his notebook and camera. He clicked the flash. The figures recoiled, shrieking, dissolving into the fog. For a moment, he had space to breathe. The tapping stopped. Silence returned, but it was unnatural, heavy, expectant. Daniel knew it was only temporary. He needed answers. He needed to understand what Ravencroft was, why it had been erased from every map, and why the town seemed to consume anyone who dared enter. He made his way back to the town hall, determined to search for more journals, more clues, anything that could tell him how to survive. The doors were closed now, sealed by something unseen. His hands shook as he pushed against them, then noticed the symbols etched into the wood, arcane markings, dark and curling, pulsating faintly. He touched them, and a vision struck him, shadows moving through the town, people screaming, vanishing into the mist. He saw names carved into walls, dates, warnings, and at the center of it all, a figure, taller than any man, faceless, reaching into the souls of the townspeople, feeding off their fear. Daniel staggered back, gasping. The fog outside thickened again, curling around the building, hiding the shapes that lurked just beyond sight. He understood, with sudden, horrifying clarity, that Ravencroft wasn't a village, it was a trap, a living entity that fed on anyone who discovered it. And tonight, he had stumbled straight into its maw. The tapping began once more, faster, urgent, relentless. The shadows moved closer to the windows, pressing against the glass. Daniel gritted his teeth and readied his camera. If he was to survive the night, he needed to fight back with light, with truth, with anything that could pierce the fog. He whispered to himself, voice shaking, "I will not belong here. I will leave. I will survive." But deep inside, he knew that Ravencroft did not allow defiance. It was patient, it was eternal, and it was hungry. Daniel didn't sleep. He couldn't. The fog outside pressed against the windows like a living thing, whispering, taunting, reminding him of the faceless figures waiting in the shadows. He needed answers. Every instinct screamed to leave, but the roads were gone, erased by the mist, as if Ravencroft wanted him trapped forever. He remembered the journals he had found in the town hall. Some pages were torn, others water damaged, but one section remained intact. It was a ledger, listing names, dates, and cryptic notes. The harvest is ready. The children cannot leave. The fog remembers. The writing was inconsistent, sometimes childish, sometimes precise and careful, almost scholarly. But what caught his eye was a map. Unlike any normal map, it seemed alive. The streets shifted when he looked at them, alleys lengthened or disappeared entirely. At the center of the map was a blackened circle marked with the symbol he had seen on the town hall doors. Daniel realized this symbol was the key. Whoever, or whatever, controlled Ravencroft used this mark to anchor the fog, the shadows, the tapping, and the faceless figures. He needed to know who had made it. He decided to venture toward the outskirts, where the map indicated an abandoned church. Legend, according to one damaged journal, said the church had once been the heart of the village, the site of a covenant between the townspeople and something else. Something old, something hungry. As he walked, the fog thickened, colder now, carrying whispers that weren't just voices, they were memories, images, warnings. He saw glimpses of the past, townspeople performing strange rituals, chanting in a language he didn't understand. Children were lined up around a stone altar, their eyes wide with fear, while a tall, faceless figure stood over them, its hands moving as if conducting the fog itself. Daniel stumbled and fell into the mud, shaking. His heart pounded. The visions receded, but the fear stayed. He could feel it in his bones. The town itself was a sentient predator. Finally, he reached the church. Its doors were torn off their hinges, the windows shattered. Inside, pews lay broken, the altar cracked and blackened. In the center, a circular symbol was carved into the floor, the same as the one on the town hall doors. Daniel stepped closer. The symbol pulsed faintly, as though it were breathing. Around it, in a semicircle, were mannequins, or at least, they looked like mannequins. But as he approached, he realized they were not inanimate. Their heads turned to follow him, faceless, hollow eyes staring into his soul. He backed away, heart racing. Then he heard a voice, deep, hollow, vibrating through the church. You see now, human. You see the dead. The symbol on the floor glowed brighter. The mannequin stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Daniel raised his camera, using the flash again. Light sprayed across the room, and the figures froze, recoiling. But the pulsing symbol seemed to grow, sucking the light back into itself. The harvest is ready, the voice whispered. Daniel understood. The town demanded payment. Every person who entered, every visitor, was a sacrifice to the entity. The faceless figures, the fog, the tapping, they were all guardians, feeding off fear, maintaining the balance. And the symbol was the anchor, the source of its power. He had a choice: attempt to destroy it, risk becoming part of the town, or find another way to survive. In the church's shadows, he saw a small trapdoor, half covered in debris. It led to the basement. Something urged him down: curiosity, fear, desperation. He pried it open and climbed into the darkness. Below, the basement was a labyrinth of stone corridors, damp and cold. Old wooden doors lined the walls, each marked with symbols similar to the one above. One door was open, revealing remnants of a ritual: burnt candles, twisted dolls, and bones. Human bones. Daniel gagged, realizing these were the remains of the harvest. A whisper floated from the darkness: join us, or be consumed. He ran. The corridors twisted, changing as he moved, leading him back to the church floor. But the symbol was different now. It had grown larger, glowing red, pulsating like a heartbeat. And standing atop it was the entity. Tall, faceless, impossibly thin, its hands outstretched. You cannot leave, it said, its voice inside his mind. All who see us are bound. Daniel gritted his teeth. The camera was in his hand. He knew he had one chance. With a scream, he smashed the flash against the symbol, the light exploding outward. The entity recoiled, screeching, shadows peeling away like wet cloth. The fog surged, then recoiled, as if wounded. He didn't wait. Daniel ran out of the church, out into the streets. The town around him was alive, buildings twisting, fog thickening, whispers calling his name. He ran blindly, following the map in his head, trying to find the edge of the fog, the exit. And then he saw it, just beyond the trees at the edge of town, the real world. Sunlight, birds, the roads. He sprinted, never looking back. Behind him, the fog churned violently, almost sentient, as if the town itself wanted him back. Daniel didn't stop until he reached his car, finally finding it where he had left it. The engine roared to life, tires spinning on the mud as he drove away. But even as he left Ravencroft behind, he felt it in his mind: the tapping, the whispers, the hunger. The town wasn't gone. It would wait, and it would remember. Daniel couldn't sleep. Not really. Every night the tapping returned, soft at first, almost polite, then growing louder, insistent, pounding at the edges of his mind. The nightmares were worse. Ravencroft wasn't just a town, it was alive, aware of him, and it was calling him back. He knew he couldn't ignore it. If he did, the fog would follow him, creeping into his life until there was no distinction between reality and the town's twisted dimension. He decided to investigate. He needed answers. With the journals he had taken from the town hall, he scanned every page, every damaged note, cross-referencing names and dates with historical records. The town of Ravencroft had never existed officially. Census records, land deeds, newspapers, none mentioned it, but references appeared in obscure folklore texts, diaries, and forgotten history books. Each source told the same chilling story. Ravencroft had been built over a cursed land, a nexus of something preternatural. Generations of townspeople had made a pact with an entity from the fog, sacrificing outsiders to maintain the town's prosperity. And the entity had a name, though no one dared speak it aloud. Daniel's research led him to the name Azrael. It was described as a collector of fear and life, a being that thrived on ritual and memory. It didn't exist in physical form, but it could manifest through the town, the fog, and the faceless figures. Every 100 years, it demanded a harvest, people who had wandered too close or became obsessed with Ravencroft. Daniel felt felt a chill. That meant he wasn't just an intruder, he was a target. And by photographing the town and the entity, he had drawn its attention. One night, while reviewing footage from his camera, Daniel noticed something horrifying. In the background of several clips, the faceless figures weren't just standing still, they were moving, appearing closer, following him. Shadows in his apartment shifted against logic, and whispers filled the room. The tapping began again, coming from inside the walls. Daniel smashed the source of every potential explanation, pipes, radiators, neighbors, but it persisted. Then a voice echoed in his mind, return, or perish. Daniel realized he had only one option, confront Ravencroft again. The entity wasn't letting him go. Before returning, he prepared. Daniel gathered historical texts, ritual artifacts he had found in the town hall, and equipment to capture or repel Azrael. He reached out to experts, paranormal researchers, folklorists, even a retired occult detective named Miriam Kells. Miriam was skeptical at first, but the evidence convinced her. She warned Daniel, this is not a place you can simply escape. The town is a predator. You have to understand it before you try to fight it. Together, they studied the symbols, discovering that the carvings were more than decoration. They acted as anchors, binding the entity to the town and to its victims. If Daniel could disrupt these symbols, he could weaken Azrael. But the risk was extreme. One misstep, and he would become part of the harvest. Daniel and Miriam returned on a gray morning. The fog was thicker than ever, rolling across the fields like waves. They parked at the edge, the same place Daniel had first seen the town. Nothing looked real. Even the air seemed heavy, as if charged with intent. They carried cameras, UV lights, salt, and ritual tools. The first few minutes were silent, too silent. No tapping, no whispers. But then the ground trembled slightly, and a cold wind brought a familiar whisper, you should not have returned. Faceless figures emerged from the fog surrounding them. Unlike before, they didn't move randomly. They coordinated, forming a barrier. Daniel raised his camera, Miriam chanted protective incantations, and the symbols on the ground glowed faintly. They moved toward the town hall, the source of the entity's power. As they approached, the air thickened. Shadows twisted into shapes, children, townspeople, all faceless, all watching. The ground beneath them pulsed with a heartbeat-like rhythm. Daniel understood, the entity had sensed their intent. Azrael was preparing a final defense. Inside the town hall, the main chamber had transformed. What had once been a simple meeting room was now a labyrinth of carved symbols, candles, and mirrors. At the center lay a massive circular pattern, the largest Daniel had ever seen. It pulsed with red light, feeding off the fear that hung in the air. This is it, Miriam whispered. Destroy it, and you can sever the entity's hold. Daniel examined the pattern. There were layers. Each symbol corresponded to a victim, a memory, a piece of the town's soul. Destroying it would not only disrupt Azrael's power but also risk unleashing centuries of trapped energy. He and Miriam began chanting, using the ritual they had reconstructed from journals. The mirrors reflected the symbols, multiplying the light. Shadows writhed and screamed, faceless figures moving faster, attempting to block them. Daniel raised his camera. A flash. A surge of light spread across the chamber. The mirrors cracked. Symbols burned. The entity shrieked in the void, a sound that made the walls shake. Azrael finally appeared, larger, more terrifying than ever. Its faceless form towered, limbs stretching unnaturally. Daniel felt his mind being pulled, memories twisting, fears becoming real. You cannot destroy me, the entity whispered. I am Ravencroft. I am your fear. Daniel gritted his teeth. You're only part of the past. I control the present. He activated a device Miriam had prepared, a combination of light, sound, and ritual energy, designed to trap the entity in a temporal loop. Ravencroft was free, for now. The town remained abandoned, but no longer alive. The fog became a natural mist, harmless and quiet. Daniel's footage, journals, and Miriam's research became a foundation for understanding the entity, but they knew the danger wasn't gone. Other towns, other entities, all waiting. Daniel returned home, scarred, haunted, but alive. The tapping never returned, yet every so often, when he looked at a shadow in his room, he could swear he saw something move, waiting, watching, and in the back of his mind, a whisper lingered, we remember. Daniel thought Ravencroft was the end of the nightmare. He was wrong. The days after returning from Ravencroft were uneventful, almost painfully so. The sun shone normally, birds sang, and the city seemed indifferent to the horrors Daniel had endured. Yet, at night the silence felt unnatural. His dreams were filled with fragments of other towns, places he had never visited, each shrouded in fog, each with its own set of faceless figures. One morning, Daniel awoke to find a package at his doorstep. No return address, just a small, unmarked box. Inside were old photographs, a town square, a church, an abandoned school, all locations he had never seen but which radiated the same malevolent energy as Ravencroft. A note lay on top, they are waiting for you. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, almost like it had been scratched by something inhuman. Daniel knew he wasn't done. Azrael had been just one of many. Miriam returned to Daniel's apartment, having sensed the same surge of residual energy. She laid out her findings, entities. Ravencroft was part of a network, she said. Other towns, other entities, all connected through the fog and the rituals. We stopped Azrael, but the network is still active. Each entity has its own agenda, but they share one goal: to harvest humanity's fear. They needed help. Using encrypted channels, Miriam contacted occult researchers across the country. Some dismissed their warnings as delusions, but a few agreed to join. People who had seen faceless figures, witnessed towns vanish, or survived encounters similar to Ravencroft. Among them was an ex-government operative named Caleb, specializing in anomalies, and a folklorist named Evelyn, who had spent years tracing the origins of dark rituals in forgotten towns. Together, they formed a small but determined team. Evelyn had a breakthrough. She traced the town's origins to a centuries-old secret society called the Umbral Circle. Every 100 years, the circle would orchestrate a ritual to summon entities into the physical world, embedding them into towns as anchors for power. Using historical maps, journals, and witness accounts, the team created a map of darkness, marking the known sites of these cursed towns. Ravencroft was just one dot. There were dozens more, each connected by ley lines, mystical currents of energy that strengthened the entities. Daniel realized the enormity of the threat. Stopping one town wasn't enough. If the network remained intact, Azrael might return stronger, and other entities could awaken simultaneously. The team's first target was Black Hollow, a town abandoned for nearly 50 years. Evelyn's research indicated it had been a site of extreme ritual activity, with reports of disappearances that vanished from official records. As they approached, the fog hit first, thick and suffocating. Daniel's stomach churned. He had felt this before. Faceless figures emerged, moving in waves, merging with the mist. Caleb and Miriam formed a protective circle, chanting as Evelyn mapped the town's anchor points. Inside the church, they found a chamber similar to Ravencroft's town hall, filled with symbols and mirrors. This time, though, the layout was more complex. Each symbol pulsed with a distinct rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. "This is worse than Ravencroft," Daniel muttered. Azrael was organized, but this is systematic. The team realized the network wasn't random, it was growing stronger with each harvest. The entities communicated, shared power, and expanded their influence beyond their towns. As they began dismantling the symbols, the faceless figures attacked in coordinated patterns. Shadows stretched across walls, and the mist seemed alive, shaping into claws, spikes, and serpentine forms. Daniel raised his camera, capturing the distortions. The device Miriam had built for Ravencroft now hummed louder, feeding off their collective fear and focusing it as a counterforce. "We have to break the anchor," Miriam shouted. They began chanting, breaking mirrors, destroying symbols, and disrupting the flow of energy. Suddenly, a massive shadow formed, towering over them. Its voice was a chorus of screams, whispers, and pleas, merging into a single terrifying sound: "You cannot stop the network." Daniel felt his mind being pulled, memories twisted, as if the entity was testing him, trying to break him before it consumed the town. With a surge of courage, he activated the device. Light, sound, and ritual energy intertwined, forming a vortex that engulfed the shadow. The entity shrieked, pulling the faceless figures into the vortex before collapsing. The fog lifted. Black Hollow was silent. The team regrouped outside the church, battered but alive. Daniel looked at the map of darkness. Each destroyed anchor weakened the network, but it was only temporary. They needed a plan to destroy the society behind it, the Umbral Circle. "If we wait," Evelyn warned, "they'll rebuild, stronger than before. We have to strike at the source." The source, she explained, was hidden in the oldest town on the map, a place older than any modern record, built on rituals that predated written history. It was the cradle of the network, the place where entities first entered the physical world. Daniel clenched his fists. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The world outside seemed peaceful, but Daniel knew better. Peace was only a veil. Ravencroft had been just one thread in a tapestry of darkness, and now he had the terrifying realization that the network stretched far beyond his understanding. It arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. Daniel had barely opened his eyes when he saw the brown envelope on his doormat. No return address, no postmark, just a thin envelope with a faint, oily scent of decay. He tore it open. Inside were photographs. Not ordinary photos, but images of towns he had never visited: cracked streets, abandoned schools, empty playgrounds swaying in windless air. At the bottom of each photo, in jagged, uneven letters, a single word was scrawled: waiting. A folded piece of paper fell from the envelope. On it, barely legible in faded ink, was a message: "They know you saw them. You cannot hide. Find the others, before it's too late." Daniel's pulse raced. Azrael had been only one of many. The photograph of a small, fog-shrouded town tugged at his memory. He hadn't been there, but somehow, he knew he had to go. Miriam returned the same night, carrying a laptop filled with research. She had been tracking similar disappearances, old legends, and folklore accounts of faceless entities. "Ravencroft isn't unique," she said. "It's part of a pattern. There are dozens of towns like it, all tied together by some kind of network. We stopped Azrael, but the network network isn't finished yet. Together, they contacted people who had seen similar phenomena. Caleb, a former government operative with experience in anomalous cases, Evelyn, a folklorist who specialized in ritualistic cults, and 2 other survivors of minor entity encounters. They became an unlikely team, united by fear and purpose. If we want to end this, Daniel said, we need to understand it first. Evelyn pulled up a map dotted with towns. I call it the map of darkness. Each point is a known anchor for these entities. Ravencroft is just one. There are many more. The first destination was Black Hollow, a town abandoned nearly 50 years ago. Official records listed it as deserted due to a mining collapse, but locals whispered of disappearances, strange lights, and voices in the fog. As they approached, the fog swallowed the horizon. Trees twisted unnaturally, and the air smelled of damp soil and iron. The moment they entered the town, the temperature dropped. Shadows moved independently of the light, and whispers slithered along the streets. We're not alone, Caleb muttered, scanning the perimeter with a flashlight. Faceless figures began to appear, drifting through walls, their movements jerky but purposeful. Daniel's chest tightened. The sense of being watched, of being prey, was immediate. Inside the old church, they discovered a ritual chamber. Mirrors lined the walls, etched with symbols they hadn't seen before. Evelyn's voice trembled. This is a nexus. Like Ravencroft's town hall, but more organized. Whoever set this up knew exactly what they were doing. The entity reacted instantly. Shadows rose, forming jagged shapes that lunged at the team. Caleb's combat training helped, but it was Miriam's chance and Daniel's device, built to focus fear into a counter-energy, that turned the tide. We have to destroy the anchor, Miriam shouted, smashing mirrors with a ceremonial dagger. The shadow coalesced into a towering form, a horrific amalgamation of faces, hands, and writhing darkness. Its voice was a chorus of agony. You cannot stop what is inevitable. Daniel felt his mind being pulled, memories bending like water, fear digging into his soul. But he forced his hand over the device. Light erupted, sound fractured reality, and the shadows were sucked into a vortex that formed around the mirrors. When it dissipated, Black Hollow was silent, empty. The fog receded, leaving only the echoes of what had occurred. Outside the church, Evelyn examined her notes. This network, it's centuries old. A secret society called the Umbral Circle orchestrates these rituals. Every 100 years, they summon entities to anchor in towns, feeding on fear and chaos. Daniel clenched his fists. So Ravencroft wasn't the first, and it won't be the last. Exactly, Evelyn said grimly. And the more anchors they establish, the stronger the network becomes. They realized their mission was bigger than they imagined. Destroying anchors was only a temporary solution. To end the cycle, they had to strike at the heart of the Umbral Circle itself, the oldest town on Evelyn's map, hidden from all records, where the first anchor had been planted. That's where the source is, Evelyn said. Destroy it, and the network collapses. Fail, and the entities will spread, unstoppable. Daniel's stomach churned with dread. The path ahead was a nightmare they couldn't avoid. The team spent the night preparing ritual tools, protective wards, and a modified device designed to focus collective courage and fear into a weapon against the entities. Daniel couldn't sleep. Visions of faceless figures haunted him, merging into one vast, incomprehensible presence. We have to go tomorrow, Miriam said quietly. We don't know what we'll face, but we can't wait any longer. Daniel nodded, gripping the device tightly. Ravencroft had been the beginning. Black Hollow had proven the network's reach. The ancient town awaited, and whatever awaited them there, it was the final confrontation, the place where everything would either end, or the darkness would consume them all. The map was old, drawn on parchment that smelled of mildew and dust. The town they sought had no name on any modern chart. Evelyn referred to it as Obsidian Hollow, though even that was a name pieced together from half-forgotten texts and whispered legends. The team drove for hours through mountains that twisted unnaturally, as if the landscape itself resisted their passage. Trees bent away from the road, shadows lingering longer than they should. By nightfall, the fog returned, thick and suffocating, making it impossible to see the horizon. This is it, Evelyn whispered. Obsidian Hollow isn't just hidden, it's alive. The town was smaller than they expected, almost microscopic in size, yet there was a tangible weight to the air. Buildings leaned at impossible angles, windows black voids that seemed to inhale light. The streets were cobblestone, slick with perpetual moisture, though no rain fell. Daniel felt a sense of vertigo, a mental tugging as though unseen eyes were scanning his soul. Every hair on his body stood on end. Remember, Caleb said, loading a silver-tipped rifle, we are not here to explore. We are here to destroy the anchor. Evelyn led them toward a central plaza. At its heart was a fountain, cracked and dry, with twisted statues of humans merging with animal forms that should not exist. The anchor, Miriam said, is beneath that fountain. The ritual site is older than any town records. The circle has been using it for centuries. Before they could approach, shadows coalesced into human-like forms, their faces twisted, melting like wax. Unlike anything they had encountered before, these entities didn't just attack, they manipulated reality. Streets warped, buildings stretched, and and the team found themselves disoriented, walking in circles despite moving forward. "Focus!" Daniel shouted. He activated the device, releasing a pulse of light that cut through the warped shadows, momentarily stabilizing the environment. The shadows screamed, not with sound but with mental pressure, images of their deepest fears projected directly into their minds. Evelyn saw her mentors, twisted into grotesque puppets. Caleb relived failed missions where innocents died. Daniel confronted visions of his own death repeated endlessly. "We cannot break." Beyond comprehension. Miriam continued her research into protective wards and rituals. She had learned the delicate balance between fear and power, how the two could be channeled to protect rather than destroy. Yet, even in her strongest spells, she felt a lingering presence, as if Obsidian Hollow's remnants were watching. One night, a wind stirred outside Evelyn's study. She looked out the window and saw a faint, black fog rising from the distant hills. It was slow, almost imperceptible, but it moved with intent. Her heart raced. She ran to Daniel and Caleb, and together they watched the horizon. There was no panic, only understanding. The darkness they had fought was not confined to one town or one anchor. It was infinite, patient, and cunning. "We delayed it," Evelyn said quietly, "but it never truly dies." A soft whisper echoed through the air, just beyond comprehension, like the wind carrying words from another world. "Not finished, never finished." The team understood now that their fight was eternal. They had faced horror unimaginable, but they had survived. They had destroyed a seed of darkness, but others could, and would, sprout if vigilance faltered. The world seemed ordinary again, but only superficially. Shadows were longer than they should be, and silence often carried hidden murmurs. Every creak in a floorboard, every flicker of light could be a signal or a warning. Yet there was hope. Their courage, knowledge, and unity had proven that even against the incomprehensible, humans could fight and endure. They had become guardians, sentinels against the encroaching unknown. As the sun rose one more time over a world oblivious to the horrors that had almost consumed it, the team stood together. They were battered, scarred, and forever changed, but ready. The darkness waits. It is patient. It tests, it manipulates, it tempts. And one day, it may return. But when it does, they will be ready. Because in a world of shadows, courage becomes the light. And light, no matter how faint, always fights back.